Good day. I'm John Fernandez. Welcome to eNewsline Live from AACSB's world headquarters in Tampa, Florida. eNewsline Live is a streaming video that addresses issues facing the management education industry through interviews with a recognized expert and a live global audience. The first 25 minutes will be discussion of predetermined questions, and the final 15 minutes will be discussion of questions posed by the live studio audience. Segments air bi-monthly, and a recording of each program is available on AACSB's website the day after the live broadcast. Our guest today is Fred Collopy. Dr. Collopy is Senior Associate Dean and Professor of Information Systems at Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School of Management. Fred is a prolific publisher in both academic and practice journals and an expert contributor to the Business Week and Fast Company blogs dealing with innovation, design, and management. Fred has generously contributed his time to AACSB for the Redesigning the MBA Curriculum Development Symposium and the more focused Redesign Seminar on Design Thinking for Creativity, Innovation, and Transformation. Our discussion today with Fred will be Innovation and Design, Studio Education for Management Balance. We're grateful to have such an experienced and influential person with us today to discuss the increasingly important role of innovation and design in modern management and management education. Fred, welcome to ENL.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
This should be an exciting day. A lot of terms are used to refer to this space: innovation, design thinking, creativity, even studio education. As noted in the title of today's episode, help us start on the same page by characterizing these terms, their relationship to one another, and their current state within business schools.
Oh, good. I'd be happy to. The outcome that we're looking for is often innovation. That's the linchpin in terms of the results. And we hope that people will approach problems that require innovation in creative ways. And so those link very directly to one another. But it's hard to say to someone, we want you to be innovative, or we want a more innovative solution, and stop there. They need help. They need some guidance on what does it take? How do you do it? How do you produce an innovative outcome? And that's where design comes in. By looking at designers, people who have had to, for a couple of centuries, be very systematic about making things new when faced with a complex issue or problem or opportunity, we can learn about methods and techniques, about structures, about processes, and about attitudes. And so that's the design, that's what drives us to design itself. You mentioned also design thinking, and that phrase has great currency in the management literature today, and in a way represents the fusion of managing and designing. I have some reservations about the phrase design thinking, because it puts that focus in the noun position on thinking. And yes, designers have to think. We all have to think as we approach our work. But the interesting thing that design brings into the mix is the acting and the doing. And that gets a little bit lost when we say to our students, we're going to teach you a class in design thinking, because it suggests that somehow it's not up to what the designer would do faced with the same problem. Our problems may be quite different than, say, an industrial designer's or a graphic designer's problems. Ours might be more strategic or more organizational, but they are still design problems. They're still problems for which there's no easy solution. There's no one way to go at it.
Design is the massage. Is there an intellectual foundation for what is meant by design? Something that research has taught us is that makes this a discipline discrete from finance, accounting, strategy?
I think there is. I think actually there are several. One of them starts really with Herb Simon's Sciences of the Artificial, a classic work in management. And other disciplines in which the great Nobel laureate Herb Simon thought about the kinds of systems that humans create, whether those systems are essentially engineering-based systems or legal systems, whether they're the arts, whether they're social systems. He said we need a different set of competencies to approach and understand those systems from the set that we need, say, to understand natural systems, which is where the sciences come in. So management at one time, and probably has for a long time, been on a rush in our academic setting to imitate the sciences, the natural sciences. And Simon said, well, some of that's good, but there's also more that you need. And the way he represented it was that there were three clusters in which we needed to develop capability, and our students needed to develop capability. The first one he called intelligence. And intelligence for us, starts with things like market analysis, understanding our competitive position, our own position. The tools we've refined and developed for intelligence are extensive, and they touch almost every discipline in a management school and in a management structure. The second one is choice, decision, and decision theory, optimization, statistics, all of these things that we've built up, these extraordinary capabilities around in order to be able to make choices. His third cluster he referred to as design. And this is the generative piece, the piece that says, maybe all of the options that I'm given, if I'm just to take the way it's being done in the world, if I'm to use intelligence to understand other people's practices, if I'm to use decision-making to pick among them, maybe that's not the best place for us to be sitting right now. Maybe we need to generate a whole new set. So that's one very deep theoretical ground, is his work there. But other disciplines have also brought along really interesting things, and one of them is urban planning. A couple of scholars, Riddle and Weber, wrote a paper on dilemmas in developing a general theory of planning, in which they identified wicked problems. And wicked problems are problems for which there's no clear, identifiable framing. You could frame it as a marketing problem. You might frame it as a supply chain problem. You might frame it, as a customer service problem. And when you frame it, you decide an awful lot about how you're likely to solve it. And different framings produce different solutions. And no one solution is the best. And so these problems are much more common today than they were even 10 years ago. They play a much bigger role in managing today. And it's these problems in particular that designers have been wrestling with in other domains. When the great C. West Churchman, one of the founding members of Case Western Reserve's business school, when he encountered that article, he said, this also imposes a moral obligation on us as managers, because it means if we're going to take on the really big problems of humanity and organizations, we're going to have to do so with a moral sense, because we'll never have the right answer, and we'll have to be humble about the answers we propose. So there's an intellectual tradition there that fuses, the interest in ethics with the interest in design. And then a third area that I think provides great intellectual depth for us is cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology and neurology have been developing some fascinating empirical results that support an old idea about the two hemispheres that make up human awareness and consciousness and intelligence. And while the two hemisphere thing is sometimes oversimplified, it's not really clear that one hemisphere does all of one and all of the other. There do appear to be, according to this deep well of research, there do appear to be these two very different ways of being in the world. The one highly analytic, linguistic, logical, data-driven, and the other more intuitive, aesthetic, more visual. And given these two ways of being in the world, one brings much more to an interesting management problem than when choosing one or the other. And a wonderful work by Ian McGilchrist, he has summarized the history of Western civilization in terms of these two ways in the world. And the most recent 100 years is one that's been inordinately dominated by the pure analytic. And I think some of that lays at the door of management researchers and scholars. And so I think by by bringing these pieces together, we have a very, very rich intellectual tradition off of which we can begin to learn how we might strengthen the people who graduate from our schools and our own research programs.
Absolutely. Well, AACSB has wicked problems too, Fred, so I hope that you can help us with our design and our thinking. In your response to the first question, you framed innovation as an outcome. In its 2010 report, the AACSB Business Schools and Innovation Task Force wrote that business schools have numerous opportunities to more actively support innovation that drives business and societal success. In what ways does the incorporation of design in the curriculum help business schools to better achieve this objective through their graduates?
Good. I think that task force really wanted to draw us into a broader range of thinking about management and where we can have impact. I think that its call for us to be more innovative was in part about rethinking how we frame a management problem, how we determine who our stakeholders are. You know, is it enough to stop at the boardroom door, or is it enough to stop with the investors? And so, in a very real sense, they were calling on us in that task force to pull back and see more and work in a larger context. And the kind of thinking I think is represented in design and design thinking. You know, the kinds of problems are problems like the problem of piracy, as it was referred to, of music on the internet, where, you know, our young people were being described as little more than criminals, and the warnings in movie theaters were that, you know, if we didn't stop our kids from downloading music on the internet, you know, they were going to end up in jail. You know, this was one way to frame the problem. But, you know, some clever, mostly younger people working, you know, for, you know, a big company that was struggling at the time, saw the problem differently. They saw it as an opportunity to take something that was free and turn it into something that you could charge 99 cents pop for. And, you know, they had to develop a cool device. They had to create a website that would be, you know, easy to use and engaging. They had to make licenses with the record producers and so forth. There were a lot of messy things that had to get done in order to pull that off. But it was a different way of approaching the problem from the way that was dominant at the time. You know, or another illustration for me that I love is, you know, Midwestern trucker Malcolm McLean in the 1970s becomes concerned about, you know, the fact that his trucks are sitting by the edge of the dock waiting for longshoremen to take the material off the ship, one barrel and one bushel at a time, and begins to appreciate that the time that ship is sitting in port is time it's not doing what it was made to do, which is cross oceans. And this was a bottleneck at the time on transoceanic commerce. And in fact, other people were working on it. They were trying to make the ships go faster at sea. McLean got the idea that he could just load the truck onto the ship and thereby reduce the amount of time by a lot that it took to get things on and off. Now, that was a big, messy thing that had to be done to actually make that happen. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't get started on it because he was in the trucking business and therefore not allowed by interstate commerce restrictions to be in the shipping business. But ultimately, he found ways. He sold his trucking company. He bought a couple of ships. He figured out the mechanics and the methods of doing it. And Johnny cut the time in port from 3 weeks to 18 hours. This at a time when everybody was working to save the time at sea, which was only 1 week, a smaller portion of the thing. So, and today we're faced with similar problems when we look at, say, healthcare, where so much of what's being proposed and talked about are really band-aids that just slow down, you know, or alter in fairly minor ways the incentive schemes, for example, or, you know, or where in the system we drive people so we can get cost advantages, when in fact a transformation of the sort that we saw in those two examples would take us perhaps to answering the question, how do we think about wellness? How do we, instead of worrying about acute care and fixing the problem that presents at the moment, how do we produce a society in which people present a lot less often. So this is all what I think the Innovation Task Force was really calling for, is for us to bring our incredible skill and talent and that of our students to bear on rethinking these problems so that we have much broader and more exciting impact.
Yeah, great examples of thinking outside the box. Is attention to design within business programs an opportunity for cross-campus collaboration? Or is this seen as incursion into the turf of other units?
Yeah, it's both, I think. And to me, one of the excitements is the way in which it's both. In, I guess, 2004, Daniel Pink published in the Harvard Business Review the declaration that the MFA is the new MBA. Now, that should freak you out a little bit. It did me. That's throwing down the gauntlet. The Master's in Fine Arts is going to trump the Master's in Business Administration as the place to go to find people to run your organizations. And so there's the collision of these two, the schools of art and design teaching, the people who are consulting firms are going to want to hire to think about strategy. That was a wake-up call for some of us. And yet, there are enough problems that there's room for everybody. And we've found that bringing people together, in our case from the Cleveland Institute of Art, our nearby neighbor, which is not a part of Case Western Reserve University, it's a separate institution, that's been an exceedingly dynamic and exciting thing for both faculties and students from both institutions. And so the opportunities, to bring people with these very different backgrounds, with this right brain way of being in the world and this left brain way of being in the world, and throw them together with the invitation to share their ways of being in the world. There's a great, I think, a great little story in our personal experience that illustrated it for me. So the Institute of Art has outgrown their current building, and they're actually building new plant now, but they have this spring show. And one of the faculty, because we'd gotten to know one another, came to me and said, I wonder if we could put our spring show in the Peter B. Lewis building, your building, a Frank Gehry design piece of architecture. It'd be cool and inspiring for our students. And the first year we did it, John, some students, not a lot, but some complained that, these artists have taken over our building at a time when we really need the building in order to, study for exams. So I thought, well, this is because they don't own this show in any way. But while we were walking around at the show, one of our MBA students and I stopped. A young woman had designed a new kind of hair dryer, and instead of being form factored like a gun that you point at your head, it was form factored, like something you caress your hair with. And it was a very cool industrial design exercise. And this MBA looked at her and said, do you have plans for this? Have you figured out how to license it? Do you know how much of it's protectable by IP? Have you any thought about a business strategy? And this sophomore, junior in college was like, no, I don't have a clue about those things. And the exchange that took place was very, very exciting when these two worlds collided. And it led us to think, well, how can we, make this show something that these MBA students are part of and enjoy as well, and we've worked on methods to do that. But this is just a very concrete illustration of the excitement that transpires when they collide. Now, that said, I will say one of the things that's allowed us to race ahead of many other schools at Case Western Reserve University in bringing design foursquare into the business school is that we don't have a design school, and we don't have to compete with or fight with the rest of the institution for the right to use titles, for turf, and so it can play both ways. But I think in net, we are human beings, and the more we can open up all the aspects of the human character, the better off we are and our students are.
And it's an exciting development for the future of the MBA as more schools begin to adopt, encourage design thinking towards innovation. I think that makes the MBA a combination of the fine arts and the traditional business principles. It's still important. What should schools be striving to teach? Is it a skill, a mindset, a body of knowledge?
Again, it's one of those all of the above kinds of responses that's called for here. I think there are clearly some skills, and some of the skills are skills we already teach. We already teach students how to ideate, how to do brainstorming or nominal groups or similar things. We already teach judicious decision making and how to gather information from from multiple sources. And so we've got a lot of it. And then the question is, what more do we need? And I think, there are skills that help someone reframe a problem, to help someone literally think outside the box, to relax the assumptions that are part of the problem as they see it. And those things come through exercise. And from our experience, they come from hands-on, action-based work, from having a client with a problem, bringing it into a studio, working it in the studio. The way art was taught, John, for centuries was that people talked about art. They talked about great art. They didn't actually do it. At the Bauhaus, they brought actual paints into the room, and the teachers walked around and watched people painting. And that was a revolution in education. And I like to think it's time for the Bauhauses of business to get going, where we actually walk around with our students actually working on their projects. Not we give them an assignment and at the end of the semester they bring it back and we grade it. But every week or two, we spend hours walking around, talking about it, engaging them over it, suggesting how we might change our approach to it if we were in their position. And so, these are small changes. They're not terribly hard changes to make. But they are attitudinal changes. And that's another piece of what it means to teach students design. So, if we take the model of moving from thinking to doing to being, then ultimately what we hope is to expand this set of attitudes that people bring to managing, and attitudes like empathy, a joy in playing hands-on with things, excitement at realizing possibilities, comfort with complexity and messiness, and situations in which there's no clear path and there's no right answer. All of these attitudinal things are ones that that can be cultivated if we create environments that are aimed at cultivating. So I think all of the pieces, there are skills, there's knowledge, and there are attitudes.
Brad, I mentioned to you before the broadcast that I heard this morning of this novel idea that's emanating from just across Seddon Cove at the Tampa Convention Center. This morning, a group of 30 would-be entrepreneurs are getting on what they call a startup bus and driving 4 days to Austin, Texas. During that period, they'll be designing from soup to nuts a business plan that they'll compete with in Austin, with several other schools, and then the winner will have the opportunity to present their plan for financing. But the interesting thing to me was they're starting from ground zero, and they're developing the financing, the ideas, the technology, all on this bus ride. No wonder it takes them 4 days to get to Austin. But what do you think of techniques like that? Are they gimmick or are they good strategies?
No, I think it's very exciting. I think the idea of imposing a set of constraints. So there are actually all kinds of interesting constraints involved in that scenario you've described. One of them is they're all going to be together in a fairly confined space. So that's one. They're going to have a hotbed experience. They won't be distracted. They might be distracted by their cell phones, but this precious little excuse for spending the whole time on your cell phone. They've got a 4-day limit. There is limited time. They're on a journey together. So they've created a metaphor that will be defining. The journey metaphor will be playing, even if it's only in a very subtle, subconscious way. The landscape will be changing around them. The stimulus will be. So somebody has designed that experience. Now, is that exactly the right experience? No, you never get exactly the right experience. This is a prototype. This is a first cut or maybe a second cut. I don't know what its history is, but and it will benefit from enhancement and refinement. But it's a very cool illustration of bringing, these kinds of attitudes to bear. The idea of imposing constraints is a powerful one. I asked Frank Gehry, I've taught the same Introduction to Information Systems course in one form or another probably 50 or more times. And I was saying to him, what do you do when you've done that? How do you keep it fresh? And he says, oh, that's easy. You just add a constraint. And so he and I spent a little time searching around for an interesting constraint. And this was 10 years ago, the one we came up with was to constrain it to things that the students could get for free on the internet. No textbook, no bulk pack, no Harvard Business School cases that you have to buy. Anything that they used in the class had to be freely available. And John, at every turn when I imposed that constraint, I found better solutions to the problem that I was addressing at that part of the course than I had before. So I had this governing constraint. Now I was prepared to relax it if just the perfect case was available for $1.60 or something, but it turned out I didn't have to. We really did succeed in managing the whole course that way. And it was a fairly arbitrary constraint. I could have come up with some other one, but often the way to break out of fixed patterns is by bringing not more freedom, but less to the problem that you're looking at. And that's not a universal solution, but it's one that works at times.
Well, we could go on till dusk, but we have time for one more question before turning it over to our viewers. Given the numerous, often conflicting demands of stakeholders with different needs, what is it that keeps you focused on helping to drive the incorporation of design into management education, and where should others look for inspiration in the next decade or so?
Well, I love art, and I return as often as I can to, I particularly love abstract art, and I return to abstract artists who, fortunately for me, like to write, and so they've written very stimulating essays about what they do. And the one of my favorite is a living Swiss artist, Karl Gerstner, who I've actually had the great honor to spend some time with, and he said in one of his lectures, he said, design must not be thought of as the restricted domain of artists, but it is instead the privilege of all people everywhere. And when I go back to Drucker's notion that what we do is create the condition in which other people work. That's what managers do, is we create the conditions in which other people work and then live. And I combine that with Gerstner's idea that this is our privilege. It also is our responsibility to be great designers, because whether we like it or not, everything about a business is design. Everything, the way the way its supply chain is organized, the way it uses raw materials, the attitude it has toward its customers, the policies it has toward its employees. These have all been designed either consciously or by default. And I think that the inspiration that comes from looking at people who take a more simple approach to the same complex task, as they're creating one act of beauty, for me, there's great inspiration in seeing how did they balance things, how did they think about them, how did they come up with something fresh, and then asking how much of that's relevant to what we do. So we're dealing with the most complex imaginable systems, human beings trying to in a united way pursue common purpose. That is such a complex thing and such a profound responsibility that I like to go to really simple things like what combination of colors will make someone weep. That's where I go.
Your commentary is poetic and powerful. I think that we've done quite a bit to set the stage for our audience questions, and we'll begin taking them now. This is a significantly opportunistic time for talking about innovation, and we'll take our first question now. What do you most frequently hear business schools cite as obstacles for incorporating more aspects of design thinking in doing in their curricula? And what are some solutions that you suggest?
I think probably the most common thing is, what do we take out to make room for it? We've got so much we're trying to do in a limited span of time. What goes? And what we did, at our school, at the Weatherhead School, what we did is we said, well, we know we want the students to be engaged in action-based learning. We know we've got a piece in the curriculum for that. We know it's important. And we asked the question, can we piggyback on that? Can we rethink that? Redeploy some of the resources that we have devoted to that? And that has worked for us. So we have a year-long course in the second year, and students can choose to do it with either a design approach or more sustainability focus. And they get some of both, whichever of those they choose, but there's an orientation to one or the other. And that's worked for us. That's the first objection. Second objection is, we don't know our way around these ideas. These are new and fresh and so forth. And that's, that's a valid and real concern. And there are a couple of ways you can approach it. One of them is to learn, go out and, get, task one or two faculty with learning their way up that curve. And it's not an impossible curve. We have a whole part of ourselves that wants to do it anyway. That is, we are all both living in both worlds anyway. And so, and there's more and more, really great books, and how-to books. The recent book that Jeannie Leake co-authored is excellent. Marty Neumeier has a book on companies thinking about how to apply design, and there are many others. And that's the second thing. And then bringing in people from your design school helps a lot. Co-teaching, we do some of that. I think there are answers to the knowledge gap one, where we teach ourselves up. And then there's the what's it like to be in a studio problem, and how does that require changes in our physical spaces? And our schools were designed a lot to teach cases and so forth. But most schools, the organizational behavior departments and similar functions have commanded a certain space to get small groups working together and so forth. And that's very easily, used as studio space. So I think those are the common objections and some of my suggestions.
Yes, very interesting. What are some ways that business schools are complementing their attention to creativity and design in the curriculum through research and outreach activities?
The schools that I think the schools that are most active in applying design and teaching are also among the schools that are most active in engaging in research. It's often applied management, executive level research, like at Darden that Jeannie does, and Mintzberg have done some work on applying design ideas to strategy. Youngjin Yu, a former colleague of mine, is at Fox, and he has a small group that's very actively pursuing design in the context of organization change and flows of information in impact on community. So he's got projects going in Philadelphia that touch the immediate community around Temple. So the Stanford D School people have active research programs, and I think in general that there are people who are most excited about bringing it to students are in part excited about it because they've done some particular research project that's led them to see the problem is wicked, the potential for bringing knowledge from another domain or two that have been touched by design to bear on solving the problem, and then they say, oh, and this probably should be part of what we teach as well. So I think research has actually led us more than the other way.
So, I'm interested in helping my school move in this direction, says this inquisitor. What do you recommend as resources or first steps that will help us think about how best to incorporate design into our educational programs?
Well, the AACSB has hosted these workshops on rethinking the MBA, which touch a lot of areas: globalization, leadership, critical thinking, and so forth, and includes design and creativity and innovation. And I think the reception of that event when it happened last time was very enthusiastic, and it led in turn to some day-long intensive ones, including one on innovation and design that Young Jin and I taught together. And it was great fun, and based on the responses we got, from people who participated, they felt like it gave them a really solid way to get started. So that's self-servingly one avenue that I think people, who are, closely attached to the AACSB should look to, the power of the resources right here. But there are also, as I said, there are many fine books, and there's actually been an explosion, and we can make a list of these available on your website if you like. But they, there are two kinds or more of these books, and one of them is written by, by people who are teaching and building pedagogical approaches, and the other kind is practitioners who mostly run consulting firms or have worked in corporations like Procter and Gamble, where design plays a very central role. I guess there's a third, and that's more academic. Like our Managing as Designing book is really a collection of academic, research-oriented thoughts about and pieces about, how design might shift us from a purely decision-oriented perspective on what management is to one that's more integrated. So those are the resources, the standards for us academics, books and workshops.
Well, Fred, the audience rests, but I have one more question, extemporaneously designed. I had noted several years ago that Weatherhead was also in the forefront of the sustainability movement. One of your colleagues, David Cooperrider, was well known internationally in that regard. You mentioned some areas initially that caused me to think that there's an emerging desire on the part of faculty, students, to have innovative and design-oriented thinking in the social responsibility, sustainability atmosphere. Earlier in a Newsline Live, we spoke with Steve Reineman, who's the dean at Wake Forest and former chairman of Pepsi, and his discussion was in that arena. But I'm interested in your thoughts as to how effectively, with your sustainability orientation at the school and your design thinking orientation, how that's worked, and if you've got plans for the future of working together.
It's been very exciting to be, with David and Ron and the others in that group, and to be helping with them to think about the movement across the cycle that they use in appreciative inquiry, which discovers, and then they have this design phase in there. And so in a sense, we fit into this model that they have for for completing the appreciative inquiry cycle. So we're a little piece of them, is one way of doing it. Of course, we have an alternative view, which is that sustainable issues, betterment, and so forth are a subset of the tasks one has to undertake in managing an enterprise, any enterprise, that you want to think about, your customer over the very long term, very widely conceived, your environment, your resources, and so forth. And so in that sense, they're a small piece of us. They provide a set of interesting issues and constraints and research that fit that. We jointly did together a UN Global Summit a few years ago on designing sustainable systems, and that got just an outsized response from the participants. We were both sides, I think, were pleasantly surprised by how enthusiastically the audience for that thing was able to bring these two themes that we had viewed a little bit more distinctly than probably is warranted together. So I think, the collision is happening. We don't know what it will become. We really honestly are in an experiment, and we don't know how it will settle out, what it will be called, how people will point to it, what they will make of it, so stay tuned.
Well, Fred, thank you for introducing and increasing our knowledge in a fantastic new frontier for management education. It's been truly special.
And it's been a pleasure. Thanks, John.
Thank you. And thanks to you, our viewing audience from across the globe, for your active participation in this illuminating discussion on the increasingly important role of innovation and design in modern management and management education. Please mark your calendars for the next broadcast of eNewsline Live, which is scheduled for May 9th. This will be the second installment in a special series that examines management education in a specific global region. We will hear from Dr. Sergei Myasodov, a vice rector of the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. Dr. Myasodov will also the president of the Russian Association of Business Education, and he'll talk about management education in Russia and across Eastern Europe. Please keep an eye on our website for further information on this and subsequent episodes of ENL. Thank you and have a great day.